Hi Lakshmi,
Hi, Deepa.
welcome to the first event that we are doing in our physical office after 2 years of doing only digital. So this time we are doing like a side by side conversation with our Learning Monday guest. It's also the Teachers Day today, Lakshmi, which is also why you are our guest
Yeah,
as a teacher for 34 years now with this.
yeah, thank you.
So we said no other person than Dr. Lakshmi Lingam, who has been an inspiration to us, an associate, and someone we really look to for her work with gender, women's studies. So in today's conversation, we're going to talk to her to understand her role of a teacher as a change catalyst.
Thank
So,
you.
Lakshmi, you came to our office in person some years
Yes,
ago.
yeah. I'm delighted to be back and delighted to be back in person.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is the birthday month of Lumiere. This month
Mhm.
we turn 26.
Yeah.
So I really am excited to have you as our guest today. So Lakshmi, you studied sociology,
Yes.
and how did your journey take you towards teaching? Maybe you want to tell our audience that.
Yeah. So actually, I was very keen on working in a bank because
Really?
yeah, I actually have done a commerce degree, and I was so keen on getting a bank job, and I was almost going to get a bank job. But then I also got married.
Uh-huh.
And then the thought was, since I was quite young, why should I compromise by settling into a job? Why not I actually study?
Hmm.
And it was actually a suggestion by my mother-in-law that I should do a master's degree because my in-laws actually aspired that their children and their daughters-in-law, everyone should be master's degree holders. So my mother-in-law, who is a fifth grader, actually said, "I don't think I can go to university, but I want you to go to university."
An
So that's
inspiration.
yeah,
My gosh.
absolutely. So that's when then I studied my master's degree. After that, then the idea was, since my husband has got into PhD in IIT Bombay,
Mhm.
that I should also pursue a PhD. But often when you take the line of a PhD, then automatically you are prepped up to get into teaching, or you're prepped up to do research in an organization where that's your main task. Okay, so that's how my path got built, where I moved towards teaching. So I submitted my thesis. I did my PhD from IIT Bombay. I submitted my thesis and I got this job. So when I joined TISS, then I actually did not have any teaching experience because very often, you have young people trained to become teachers for primary and secondary schools, etc. But you actually don't have such training for higher education. So you typically then learn while you're on the job,
Mhm.
and so if you have good mentors, then you actually learn how to carry on that craft well. So from day one, when I joined TISS as a faculty, where my large part of my time was to do research,
Mhm.
but I was also doing teaching. I began my journey also then as a student
Uh-huh.
because the course that you teach is not what you have studied ever.
Okay.
So, when I was given a course, and that was a course titled Women in Health. So I went to my boss and I told her, I don't think I've done anything in health. My area has been work, women in work, issues of employment and development, but I've not done any work on health. So how am I going to teach this?
Mm-hmm.
She said, this is the best space that you can be in
Mm-hmm.
because it's something that you're going to learn new. And basically, you have to, hone your skills in applying yourselves
Yes.
because you have the methodology of learning. So you now use that methodology to learn a new subject and also then learn how to teach.
And you weren't too much older than your students, I can guess.
No, I just had, I think, few years difference between them and me. So it was a lot of butterflies every time I had to go into my class
Hmm.
and burning the midnight oil of studying. And those days we didn't have PowerPoint presentations. We had to make diligently all our notes and we had cards. And then came the overhead projectors, and
Hmm.
also one evolved learning the subject, learning how to teach, and also continuously adjust and adapt to changing technologies. So
Yeah, since you
multiple
mentioned
lines of
technologies,
learning.
I think today your work as it has to do something with women and digital technologies. So
Yeah.
I know I'm jumping,
Hmm.
but that's something that you kept evolving and you kept sort of
Yeah.
discovering.
Yeah. Yeah.
So who were the mentors that you looked up to in your teaching career? People you think were good teachers, who you
Yeah.
took learned the craft from.
Yeah. So when I joined DISS, my boss, or let's say the head of the department, was Professor Suma Chitnis.
Okay.
She's a very senior lady,
Mm-hmm.
still alive, and I'm so glad that she's still around. She was really such a spirited person, and she asked me to shadow her classes. So I used to be in her class, just
That's
see,
generous, very
yes,
generous
yes,
of her.
just see how she carries the class, how she carries conversations. And I also found that she didn't demarcate what she was teaching as a subject matter that's independent of her, but she was interspersing her life experiences with the content that she was teaching. And therefore, people always felt invited into her life along with learning the subject matter. And, you know, I think I was like a sponge just taking all that, So I think I have taken a big chunk of that when in my teaching. So most of my students know everything about me because along with what I teach, I give so many examples about my own life, my own experiences, my own relationships. So I think you somewhere break that barrier of the distance between your student and you, because you come across as a person who on a continuum of years of life was born a few years ahead and therefore has those
Yeah.
experiences. And that's what I always tell them. I'm here, but because I'm born few years ahead of you, I have this opportunity to stand in front of you. So I think uh, those are the kind of experiences which I value very much. And I must also say that I had several bad teachers
Mm-hmm.
in school, in university, and all, which actually made me reflect on who should, who would be a good teacher, and what is it that you expect from your teacher. And if people don't deliver, that in a way it tells you that what is missing, you start detecting. So I always told myself, if I ever become a teacher, I'm going to make sure I'm going to do these things.
So, and
Like,
what is it that you will not do, for instance?
for example, I'll never take my students for granted.
Wow,
Okay.
that's beautiful.
I'll never go to a class without preparation. Okay. I will never shout down my student if they ask a difficult question. Okay. And I'll never, what do you call, I'll never do anything which is called microaggression. Because very clearly, Deepa, a teacher's role is one where you should be able to convey to your students that this is a position of power that the teacher is in, but the teacher is astutely aware that she does not want to exercise that power, because there is that, the teacher and the taught, the knower and the person who doesn't know. These kind of binaries can always pit people one against the other. So you need to recognize that there is a sense of inequality, and you stand there as a person who holds the power. So you have every responsibility to see that you don't exercise it negatively. You exercise it positively, and that exercising of positive is where you teach them reflection, critical thinking, um, completely unpacking concepts, linking up micro realities to macro perspectives, trying to decode very heavy duty theories in ways that they can understand. And also the ability to ask you questions which are difficult, right? Because that is what sows the seed
Mm.
for an intelligent human being, and also an intelligent citizen, and somebody who can pursue truth and talk to powers that be, right? So if you have to chisel people like that, then it means every session of yours in the classroom is basically a session of that level of empowerment,
Yeah.
and mutually you're enriching each other.
Yeah. Amazing. I think that that was really, really deep and a very important point to make. So it's almost like you're shaping the agenda for future generations of students that you're creating, and you almost take that as a responsibility to be
Yes.
like a change catalyst and a
Yes.
transformation catalyst. How beautiful. Did you meet students, Lakshmi, along the way that also uh, were like exemplars, students that you helped you or shaped you as a teacher in some manner?
In fact, in social sciences, because of the kind of subject matters we pursue, and especially in Tata Institute of Social Sciences, students are encouraged so much to go into the field. Whether it is
Hmm.
urban communities, rural
Mhm.
communities, families, disadvantaged groups, vulnerable populations, a whole range of spaces. There are a lot of spaces that young people can go which we cannot,
Mhm.
and therefore when they go, they see, they interact, they learn, they come back and they are talking to you, and you're guiding them, you're asking them more probing questions and encouraging them to go back with newer questions.
Mhm.
um, your mentoring is not a one-way relationship, because you are also learning from them, how they're navigating those spaces, what do they see the interesting conversations that they're able to have, the places where doors open, doors don't, doors close, so you are actually physically there through them, right? So there's so much you learn through that interaction. So I do have wonderful students, and thankfully I'm still in touch with them because of social media.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, technology.
Technology. Yeah,
So you are going to retire next year.
yeah.
So how are you feeling as you're closing down on this chapter of being an educator for 34 years?
Yeah. Well, I must say I'm looking forward,
Uh-huh.
because I've done enormous work at the Institute in terms of teaching, guiding students, carrying out a lot of research, publishing,
Mm-hmm.
building lots of collaborations, traveling so much across the country, not in terms of going and seeing big things, but actually going into the most interior villages in this country. I actually feel post retirement, actually, I'm going to have that time completely eased up, which is not tied up to semester cycles and examinations and all those timetables. So while I will miss the institute, I'm sure the time that I'm going to get is going to be quite exciting. So change is something I always look forward to. So I'm quite happy
You
to
know,
see where I go.
as a student,
Hmm.
what kind of a student were you? I mean, I know you said you did your commerce and you thought you'd be a bank executive. So there wasn't too much ambition, Lakshmi, and then somewhere along the way you just got a little nudge and everything just changed for you. I
Yeah.
mean, I find that so fascinating.
Yeah, I come from a very typical, simple middle class family where, when I was growing up, everybody was aspiring to only work in a bank or be a school teacher. And the maximum that we did was learning to use the typewriter and also learn how to do shorthand.
Mhm.
And then take all those exams. So you either are a secretary to somebody or you're working in a bank. I know my father was not very happy that I was learning typewriting and I was learning shorthand, because he said, "You should not be somebody's secretary. You must be the boss."
Oh,
He told me once.
oh wow.
Yeah.
Quotable quote. Amazing.
So he did that, but I told him, you know what, I have to be realistic. So I have to start somewhere to
Mhm.
slowly grow up and become a boss. So I'll do what I can at this point of time. So I wouldn't say I was a topper in my school or college or anything like that.
I find
Um,
that hard to believe
yeah,
somehow.
no, I was not a
I
topper.
always think of you like a gold as a gold medalist.
No, by the time I came to the university, I was in a much better space to understand how to study.
Okay.
Because I think my biggest problem was the entire duration of education was so much rote oriented,
Mm.
and that was not at all inspiring for me. I was very uh, eclectic. I read lots of things. I read books, I read stories, I read fiction, all that. But my own school books and all, I just did as much as should so that I can clear my exams.
Okay.
So, and barring few teachers, I also didn't have very inspiring teachers. So, I never found that space as a space that was really placing me very high or getting me to think high in life.
Amazing.
So, I enjoyed my life playing a lot. I
Mhm.
played a lot. So, I like that. So, I was very outdoors oriented, very play, all the time playing and studying as much as required. So I would therefore feel that I think intelligence, brilliance is something which cannot be measured with grades
Yeah.
and your excellence in school.
And
I'm
that's
not.
also very heartening for a teacher to bring that perspective,
Yes,
and I think it's also very liberating for the student
yes, it is.
who sees the teacher as looks at the learner in a more holistic
Yes,
and a more sort of a
yeah,
acceptant, even indulgent manner, I think.
absolutely. Because I know I evolved. From what I was
That's
on day
beautiful.
one when I did started my PhD to what I was after I completed my PhD was a huge journey because along with doing your research, when you're in institutions like IITs and all, I mean, there's so much that you learn through your peers.
Yes.
And then coming into TISS again was a huge, transformational kind of experience. So when very young people come into these institutions and they look like they're completely lost, not able
Hmm.
to cope, I'm there to reach out to
Okay.
them. So I do often conduct academic writing workshops. I tell them how to go about doing their citations. Of course, in TISs, we also encourage people to speak in a language that they are comfortable. Definitely, English is the medium of instruction, but if somebody wants to speak in Hindi, mostly, if they speak in any other language, I wouldn't understand. But we do encourage them to speak. So they evolve within those 2 years. So then, as a teacher, you find yourself all the time, belling that beautiful cat
Yeah.
to see that it really comes out of that shyness to becoming a very confident person.
So, like you said, what you would not do, what I
Mm.
hear is a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy, a lot of enabling and
Mm.
encouragement
Yes.
to students, and at the same time, sort of giving them that space through instruction, whether it is workshops. So, there is giving them the space and imparting the knowledge that they need to build confidence and grow.
Yes. Yes.
Amazing.
Mm.
Uh, so, Lakshmi, you also got once, I think, awards and scholarships to go to the US, and tell
Yeah.
us about that and your work and what you sort of brought back to your work with that.
Okay. So, 1989, I went on an international visitors program to the United States. Then 2004 and 5, I was selected for the Fulbright New Century Scholar Program, and I went to the University of Michigan, um, Ann Arbor. Then 2015, I went on a short duration Fulbright Nehru Academic Administrators Program, where in a matter of I think 15 days we traveled and visited several education institutions and all that. Then, I mean, I had fellowships at University of Montreal, University of Kiel. So, yeah, travels across the North America, UK, and all that quite a bit. But yeah, there's so much that we learn when we go, and there's so much that we take there when we go.
And
You
I'm
know.
sure it's also about, in a sense, that today the audience and the students could be so much more global, right?
Mm.
With the way,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
so when you connect, are you also in touch with a lot of students who are overseas now?
Not so much. I mean, TIS students who are overseas, many of them will be in touch with me. There are some scholars with whom I worked earlier. They are in touch with me, but these things go in cycles,
Okay.
because they're often also linked to different kinds of fellowships and grants and all that. So one is in touch and not in touch. Also, it's like that.
So,
Yeah.
what's been the most fulfilling part of your journey of these 34 years, if I were to ask you? What part have you enjoyed the most where you really felt you came into your own?
In 2012, I was asked to go and set up TISS in Hyderabad.
Uh-huh.
11, basically, 2011. So I went from Mumbai and with one suitcase and just settled there. And I set up TISS in Hyderabad from 2011 to 16. Those 5 years, which were my prime time, I used to come to Mumbai for the week in a month, but largely, went and set up. So it's like, you have a large banyan tree and then you are setting up a new seed elsewhere to make sure that there is another banyan tree which has its roots connected to the original institution but has its own way of growing to the sky.
Okay.
Again, new sets of individuals and new sets of students, new batches of faculty.
And a
So
very different kind of a student cohort that must have been.
yeah, because they do come. I mean, they still continue to be a national level kind of entrance exam, and students come from
From
all
all
over the
over.
country. Yeah,
Oh,
they
okay.
do come. Faculty are also from all over the country.
Okay.
But because I'm also,
When you
practicing.
think this, you think Mumbai campus.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that
Hyderabad is quite an amazing
and
campus. I set up.
thriving.
Yeah, it's thriving. So by the time I left in 2016, it already had 10 academic programs and 650 students, all that, So it was
That must feel very satisfying.
that, yes, it is. It's quite amazing to do that. And I also had, I think, in a way, been a feminist administrator, which is also very different from mainstream administration, where you work towards having an open door policy, work with consensus rather than, rank and file, bureaucracy, which is kind of try to navigate between typical bureaucracy to actually make systems work for people rather than people working for systems, So I think I need to write
So
sometimes.
setting the culture that you were
Yes.
creating, which was totally different,
Yes.
accessible,
Yeah.
and you need to write about
I
this.
need to write about this.
I'm interested to know because a lot of what you've done has also shaped policy,
Hmm.
and even now recently you're working with media studies and culture, and you've sort of been at the forefront of so many movements. So how does this work that you're passionate about? How do you kind of continue to do that without the ages of tastes, or will you continue to have sort of a loose relationship with tastes? How do you visualize the impact and the transformation work that you do going forward?
Actually,
Is it
though,
through writing? Is it through
yeah,
lectures?
definitely through writing, but while being at this, you're also networked with many
Okay.
organizations. So I'm the chairperson of Kutch Mahila Vikas Sangathan. Right now, I'm also part of the National Resource Group that's going to work with the entire National Rural Livelihoods Mission to strengthen the gender component.
Yeah.
So I do have a much larger ambit within which I'll be working.
Yes, that's what I
So
wanted to know.
yeah,
So even in terms of influencing policy, working with government,
yes,
World
yeah,
Bank, or I don't
yeah.
know,
It's always been there, but it's going to be
more.
more. Yeah. Hopefully, the systems won't be ageist. If they're not ageist, then there's no issue.
Yeah, I think that would change. Are you seeing that change also?
See, as long as not you're not looking for any regular job, being on
Correct.
some roles, a lot of
Like
advisory work is always there.
yes, like when I look at Dr. R.A. Mashilkar and
Mm.
the kind of he's so much there out
Yeah,
there, and
yeah,
you don't think of someone as
yeah.
retired in that
Correct.
sense because he's a
You are
thought leader.
always, yeah, correct. You're always in an advisory position there.
Yeah.
And, when you're writing and you're talking, and there's so much room for engaging in lots of different kinds of trainings
Hmm.
and, writing interesting stuff. And currently, my work, as you are asking about digital technologies, it's actually on gender and digital technologies. So,
Okay.
trying to look at what is the digital divide we have,
Hmm.
and also what are the new kinds of exclusions that are likely to happen if men are not allowed to use mobile phones, particularly in low income families and also in rural areas. There's a lot of worry about girls using mobile phones because it's seen as something that will enable them to access information and also then slowly begin to access freedom. So that's become the new threat to patriarchy. So there are lots of restrictions coming up on young girls not owning phones and not using phones. So one needs to then look at how does one work towards a future where those kind of exclusions do not happen, and we actually have schools understanding why digital knowledge and accessing information use on the internet and responsible ways of being able to use technologies is something that needs to be part of our education.
The last question that I just feel I have to ask you is what's your advice for people who will come into the teaching profession? And since it is Teachers' Day, I think it's important to close with that. You did talk about the do's and don'ts, but maybe
Yeah,
you just want to put it out there.
yeah. I would basically say that people often refer to this as a very noble profession, but you need to understand what are the aspects of nobility that actually is associated with it. And that is not about reiterating hierarchy, reiterating power, creating a rift between your student and you, but actually working towards, empowering them, and hearing them, listening to them, and also bring them into your world in a way that is quite inviting rather than intimidating.
Or even you going into their world
Yes, yes.
to discover
Yeah,
and to explore.
yes. Thank you.
It's really been marvelous talking to you, Lakshmi. And I think I like this format better than being on two screens away from each other. This is a very, very huggable format. So thank you
Yes.
so much for coming
Yeah.
here today. And
Yes.
I look forward to more conversations to stay engaged. And people, those of you listening, there's content on social media. Lakshmi is quite active. Do go listen to what she has to say. There are many talks that you can find, and I think you'd be happy to stay connected on LinkedIn and
Yes.
Twitter. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you very much.